So the Springboks are losing a few players for Super Rugby for next year. It's the video I made yesterday. That video, I guess, was more kind of lamenting the fact that Super Rugby can't keep a hold of some of the top talents in the Southern Hemisphere, more than, I guess, doubting that the Springboks will still be able to kind of go from strength to strength. If you look at these numbers, they are pretty big. It's a lot of guys leaving. Less than half of the team will be available for Super Rugby work next year. But if you're looking at Springboks availability, it's the same guys, right? Because there's no rules anymore about having to have a certain number of players domestically based in order to be eligible for the Springboks. So I think the Springboks, I mean, they may shift it up a bit and bring some of the younger guys through into the Springboks setup from the domestic setup as well. I think Rassi will, well, as director of rugby, he can influence the coach, whoever that is. But basically, I think you like to think if there's two players who are kind of equally skilled, you would generally go for a guy who is domestically based. So I wouldn't be surprised if a bit of that happens. However, what I'm here to talk to a bit is about what's happening with the other three squads from Super Rugby. I'm not including the Sunwolves and Japan. I'm just talking about Argentina, Australia, and New Zealand. And how did the All Blacks look after 2015 and their World Cup win? So I'll start with the All Blacks squad. Of the 15 guys who started that game against Australia in the 2015 final, 11 of them returned to Super Rugby after the World Cup. 16 of them were from the matchday 23, and it's 24 from, and it's interesting that it's the same number. They had the same number of injuries. 24 of them, came back from the overall World Cup squad. So it is a greater number. I guess it's around about, well, if it's just under double, it's double, and it's not quite double. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one to look at, because if I'm looking at more with the focus on Super Rugby, it's actually maybe doesn't quite go with the way you would think it would lift. Because if I go through the names of who these guys were, the four guys who started that World Cup final who ended up leaving New Zealand Rugby was Dan Carter and Richie McCaw from the Crusaders. About as big names as there are in New Zealand Rugby. And Conrad Smith and Martin Ono from the Hurricanes. Again, about as big as it gets in terms of their profile in New Zealand. So you might think that those two teams struggled after those guys left, but who won it in 2016? It was the Canes. Who won it in 17, 18, and 19? It was the Crusaders. So the fact that they lost these top draw guys, from Super Rugby, it didn't seem to have any ongoing negative effects for those Super Rugby teams. The other guys who left from the matchday 23 was Slade. He went to France. I should mention that Nonu, Carter, and Conrad Smith all went to France. It was only Richie McCaw that retired, and they all essentially went for money. It's the same reason why the South African guys are playing abroad as well. It's for a bit of coin. Mealamu retired. Sonny Bill Williams went and played sevens. I believe he was still on the books with the Chiefs, or at least New Zealand Rugby, but he didn't play any Super Rugby in 2016 as far as I'm aware. And Ben Franks went over to England. So Tony Woodcock's the other one here, and he retired, injured as he was. But yeah, you look at those names, and there's some pretty big ones there in terms of that New Zealand Rugby makeup, and yet the All Blacks still went on trucking pretty well. And as I said, the four Super Rugby results after that were New Zealand winners, and from some of the teams who were kind of most affected, because Franks was playing for the Hurricanes. They lost Nonu and Smith as well, and Slade was playing for the Crusaders alongside Dan Carter, so they had to get some new guy to play 10, and Richie Moonga. That story kind of fills in the blanks itself. So, yeah, that's where I mean, if you're looking at the New Zealand squad from this year, they're losing Sonny Bill, Retallick, Whitelock, Todd, Reed, Crotty, and Ben Smith. So again, very big names. Like, none of those guys are really a small name. I guess Matt Todd's probably the guy who's always tended to play second fiddle, but he's still a pretty highly regarded player. All those guys are leaving, so they won't be back. Actually, Retallick and Whitelock will be back. The other guys will not be back. I think Whitelock's got 1 year, Retallick's got 2. So they're all taking a break of Super Rugby, and again, it's the same deal. It's the cash thing, and a fair few of these guys are heading to Japan. So I think part of that is also the longevity of their career. They believe that the game being a bit more easy on the body, I guess, is a good place to go and play some rugby for some extra coin. The Jaguares are losing 4 guys from the Argentina squad, including the likes of Matera and Lavanini, so big names for them going as well. And the Wallabies are losing 9. The likes of Foley, Guinea, Coleman, Arnold, Pocock, the list goes on. So all of the Super Rugby sides will be impacted by the departure of all these players. What we have to see now is the young guys come through and step up. I think New Zealand always seems to have seemingly limitless depth, but maybe that will be tested. Likewise with South Africa, another country which has seen to fill in the blanks of a lot of other countries in terms of a lot of sides internationally having at least 1 or 2 South African players, and just a massive player base. So they seem to always find more players. That will be a test for these guys as well. And it might be good. Some of you guys mentioned it in the previous video that with the other guys leaving, it's a good chance for the young guys to step up, because if you are playing for a team or you've signed for a team which has got a big star in your preferred position, it's hard to break through because that guy is always going to get all the minutes. So, but there still has to be a healthy balance, because if you look at Australia when they had 5 Super Rugby teams, there wasn't perhaps the depth there to sustain that, and it did seem to push the conference generally down a bit because they just didn't quite have that same level of quality. So that's pretty much it. I still think the Springboks will be sitting pretty well after their World Cup win, despite players leaving Super Rugby. How the Super Rugby teams will be one to watch. The All Blacks similarly in the past had a wee bit of an exodus, maybe not to the same degree, but seemed to go on okay. And the All Blacks, Wallabies, Jaguares will all have to deal with these big named players patching. Maybe the Pumas not so impacted, depending on whether they decide to call overseas players or not. So Australia's got their rule with the number of caps. New Zealand doesn't allow it. South Africa has opened that up. And Argentina kind of seems to be sitting in the middle. So we will see what happens. But that's just an interesting comparison with 2015 for the All Blacks and 2019 for the Boks. Again, more thinking about how it is going to affect my beloved Super Rugby. But hey, you guys let me know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.